Hello and welcome to Practical Inclusion. It's good to be back on live, and today we've got a bit of a what I don't even know, Teresa. You work sometimes with us. You're definitely part of Bree Gorman Consulting, but you also have an entire career outside of this business as well. So I'll let you introduce yourself later. But firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people. That's whose lands that I live, work and play on. Pay my respects to elders past and present, and a real call out to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are watching us live or perhaps on the replay. And as a call out to people watching on either live or the replay, we love to have your questions through. Teresa and I are absolutely winging this conversation, and we could talk for 3 hours on the topic of allyship, about all of the things that we want to talk about. But we'd be really keen to answer your questions or talk about themes or topics that you'd like us to address. So if you're watching on LinkedIn, you can just do that by putting comments in. You can also do that on Facebook. If you're watching the replay, still do it, and we will absolutely get back to you and with some written responses. So thanks to those who are listening and watching. Teresa, I'm going to throw it over to you as usual on this show. If you could introduce yourself through story, tell us a little bit about Teresa and why you're on a Practical Inclusion LinkedIn Live.
Thanks, Bree. Look, I also want to start by acknowledging that I am today on the beautiful lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. And I just want to pay my respects and honour their ancestors for the care that they have given to the lands, the waterways and skies for millennia. These are unceded lands, and they always were and always will be. Look, how did I get here? That's a great question. Firstly, because I asked you, I said I want to appear and have a discussion with you on allyship. I think it's something that people will really benefit from. But look, a little bit about me, like everyone, I guess I wear multiple hats through my life. Professionally, as you mentioned, I do some work for you or with you. I'm also a senior business partner and specialise in diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging. But how I got there hasn't been a straight line. It was a very much a squiggly kind of fluid journey to this moment in time. Personally, I'm a mother to a neurosparkly young person who constantly reminds me, just through his way of being, that the world has not been built to allow us all to shine as brightly as we were born to shine. I'm also a wife to an incredible man and the bonus mum to two pretty special human beings. I am a biracial person. I'm a blend of Italian and Australian. For me, that was really interesting growing up. I never quite felt like I fit into either spaces. I was never Italian enough. I was too Aussie to be Italian, too Italian to be Aussie. So while I didn't look like my mum's side of the family, they're all blonde, blue eyes. More of my culture was sort of centered in that more Aussie space. But with my Italian family, while I looked like them, I didn't speak language. I didn't practice culture. It was a really kind of difficult line to straddle, I think. Because of my background, I endured a fair bit of bullying as a young person. And while I look pretty mainstream Australian these days, that wasn't the case where I grew up, the area of Victoria that I grew up in. And it was a source of a lot of pain in the early parts. I created an experience where I really tried to minimise that part of who I was. And as I said, I've really disconnected from everything that was Italian because of the shame I felt about that, because of the impact that part of my culture was having on my experience of the world. And these days, I'm pretty sad about that. I feel like, it's a part of me that's missing, and I'm doing a lot of work to rebuild that. But as we know, experience is what shapes us. So, and it is definitely a big part of the reason why I do the work that I do. My family is an incredible mosaic of humanity. And we literally come from all corners of the world. We have a huge spectrum of faiths, of languages, neurodiversity, representations of pretty much every color of the rainbow flag. And because of that diversity in my family and the experiences that I see, again, those things have really shaped the place that I'm in today and the work that I do. Probably the biggest thing that shifted me was about 12 years ago. I left an abusive relationship. The impacts of that abuse continue today. In fact, the abuse still continues today from that person. But I really focused on the ways in which I could change my life and do better. And that took me on a journey to going off to uni for the first time in my life. I didn't go to uni outside of high school, and I'm the first in my immediate family to attend university. And I got to the final, in the lead up to the final unit, and I was just exhausted from I did an MBA. I was just exhausted from study. And so I thought, what's the easiest way to finish this degree and just to kind of ease my way out of study? And I thought a study tour would be a really good way, because it would just be a holiday, right? It wouldn't be that hard. I just go on holidays. I just cruise out out of uni. So I chose an Indigenous study tour of Western Australia, which was anything but cruisy. It was probably the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, but the most transformative thing that I have ever done in my life. And I walked away from that thinking, I'd spent 20 years in administration as an executive assistant, as an office manager. And I just thought, I have to do more with my life, and I have to have a bigger impact than just working for an organisation to make money. So COVID hit, and like a lot of people during that time in COVID, I had the space through numerous lockdowns to kind of really go deep and have a think about my life. And at 42, I came to the realization of what it was that I wanted to be when I grew up. And that sort of started me on the path to DI. It was something I'd never heard of before, but it just resonated with me. I recognized that a lot of what I'd been doing in my roles had been progressing inclusion and highlighting areas where we as an organisation could do better in the various organisations I'd worked for. So it just seemed like a really natural fit. And that was when I was lucky enough to meet you as well, and had your guidance and mentorship to get into this space. And since then, I've just been on this massive trajectory of learning, particularly around allyship. It's a space that I am very, very passionate about. I don't experience racism anymore. It's not been something that I've experienced for a long time, but I have never forgot how damaging it was to be to not have the same opportunities, to be seen as other and different, and to have an aspect of my identity that I had no control over affect the joy that I could experience in my life and the opportunities that I could have in my life. So I really use that as a fire in my belly to do more, because I don't feel like anybody should ever feel like that. So as I said earlier, my son has really highlighted in recent times, particularly in the neurodiversity space, how challenging life is for him. He's a bright, incredible young man, but there are just barriers in his way to having the most amount of success he can have. And so I'm a strong advocate for him, and certainly in the workplace around removing barriers.
Thank you for taking us through that journey. I learned things about you that I didn't know already, and what struck me from the very first time that we met is that passion that you have for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I love the way that you've articulated why that is. We're going to talk about allyship today, and based on that, one of the first things that's coming to mind to me is, we see people like yourself in workplaces who do have this burning passion to create change and to be allies. And then we have a bunch of people who perhaps feel like they want to be allies, but maybe don't have that same sense of motivation. So maybe it's good for us to keep in mind kind of those two perspectives as we talk about this conversation around allyship. But before we do, give us a definition. What's the difference between performative allyship and actual meaningful allyship? Because this comes up really often, and I think people are really petrified at times that what they're doing is performative allyship and not actual allyship. So maybe if you can start us in the conversation by answering that one.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting discussion, Bree, because there are so many things that make up an ally, and some of the aspects of performative allyship, the visible signs of allyship and creating change and bringing awareness to things, are actually part of good and genuine allyship too. But performative, I think, is about doing things just so that they look good, so that they that you give this outward perception that you are fighting for something, but you're actually not taking any action. So it could be, putting up a rainbow flag on your profile, or your Facebook profile, or so on, around Pride Week or around Mardi Gras, but actually not doing anything. When you see forms of discrimination, you don't say anything. When there's an opportunity to invite people from a particular community into a conversation, you don't take that opportunity. You don't do the actions that actually change the way people think, the systems and structures that are in place that are barriers in the first place, that you just put up a rainbow flag and that's enough. So I think, as I said, parts of performative allyship are included in really good, meaningful, fearless allyship, but it's without any action, without any substance behind it. It's just putting a lipstick on a pig, really.
Okay, yeah, I think that is a good definition of it. When I'm delivering like training, and say I deliver training on LGBTIQA plus inclusion, I will talk about all the different ways that you can make your workplace more inclusive. And let's imagine I'm talking to leaders, and I'll give them, 20 different things that they can do to create inclusion in their workplace. And then I ask if there's any questions, and somebody almost always says, how can I be an ally to LGBTIQA plus people? Can you talk about why that question stuns me every time when I've just gone through that spiel?
Oh, I hope that questions like that come from a really good place, from people who genuinely want to make a difference. I think potentially people don't realise what allyship is, and potentially they're looking at people who are activists or advocates, who are loud, who are out there, who are very visible, very vocal, and they see that as the definition of allyship. And there's so many facets to allyship. And I think it was Lily Zheng who, in her amazing book, DI Deconstructed, talks about the ways in which everybody can be a change maker. And I can't recall them. I think there were 7 off the top of my, I think there were 7. But I know that some of them were more quiet in the background passive ways in which you could be an ally. So if you have the ability to change or influence policy, if you have the ability to look around a room when you're in meetings where decisions are being made and you recognize that there are voices missing from that discussion, that you could invite those people to the table, whether it's helping do the work. So you might not necessarily be out there advocating and loud, but you might be helping to organise an event that celebrates or acknowledges a day of significance. You might be able to call and speak to speakers and have diverse speakers come into your organisation. So there's ways in which you can be an ally and show allyship. You might just share a post of someone who has an underrepresented or historically marginalised voice, and you might just follow some people on social media who aren't like you, who give you different perspectives, different ways of thinking, to help build your confidence, to help build your knowledge, to help build your understanding. And all of those are ways in which you can do it without having to, have things tattooed across your body that you're an ally or an advocate for change, or turn up at protests or marches. There is ways that you can show allyship that are reflective to who you are as a person. And of course, there are those people who go out and do incredible things and change the world and bang the drum really, really loud so that the world stops and listens. And I think each of the different points along the spectrum of allyship are as critical as each other, because it doesn't matter how long or how much you bang the drum for change, if someone isn't quietly in the background writing a new policy or rolling out a new way of doing things, then neither will have the impact that's required. So I think, I think that sometimes people don't realise that there are options in terms of their allyship. I also think, and this is such a difficult piece to talk about, but we know, and you and I have talked about this a number of times, but the amount of people who want to do something but fear getting it wrong. And so it's almost like unless you give them a step-by-step checklist, a script to read from, that they fear doing anything because they don't want to do the wrong thing. And a lot of that, I think, comes from a fear of being called out. And sadly, the way our society and our social media is structured, it's very easy to say the wrong thing and then be totally torn to shreds on social media. And also people don't recognise how to get it wrong and get it wrong well. And I know that sounds like a little bit of a contradiction, but I do this as a job and I get things wrong all the time. And the response I need is not to go into this spiral of shame and anger and frustration and disappointment, is just to take it as a learning opportunity and to recognise getting it wrong actually means that in the future I will do better and I will get it right. So when I'm called out, and sometimes it's publicly, sometimes I've put things up on social media and it was the wrong thing to say, my response is always, I didn't realise. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'll do better next time, or, some variation of that. But I think they're all just opportunities to learn. And so what I've learned, but it has taken a long time, is to step into that discomfort and the unknown of potentially getting it wrong, because there are enough people who are going to tell you got it wrong. But it also means there's enough teachers out there to help you learn the lesson, and hopefully you'll do better in the future. But that does take a lot of strength and resilience to accept those types of comments and those sort of, because it can be a bit crushing sometimes, especially if you're brand new on the ally journey and you want to do better. But I also think it's about knowing that you don't know. Like, I have at times been referred to a DEI expert, but I don't think anyone can be an expert in DEI unless they are an expert in their own lived experience. I mean, I can't even be an expert of people who are biracial with Italian heritage and an English sort of background mum. I can only be an expert in my experience of that experience. So I think recognizing that we'll never be an expert, and we're always going to have to look to learn and look to find out a little bit more. Sorry, rabbiting on, but I'm really passionate about the way in which that shows up for people.
I love that, because it's the number one fear, as you say, is just I'm going to get it wrong. So that results in people doing nothing. Because they are too frightened that they're going to offend someone, or they're going to say something wrong, and so they don't be allies because they are too frightened. And I like the way, I still remember when I started this business and started posting more prolifically on socials, there was a moment there where I was paralyzed, because I was like, hang on, how can I speak on these issues? I don't know it all. You can't know it all. People are challenging me, and rightly so, and I'm still on a learning journey. And then it was somebody, a friend of mine who wasn't in the DEI space at all, who said, yeah, exactly, you're going to get it wrong, and then you're going to do better, and that is going to demonstrate to others what's more inclusive in this space and how you get it better. And we have to be prepared to be uncomfortable, get it wrong, and then, as you say, respond in a way that is compassionate. And compassionate, by using that word, I mean that deliberately. We take action to do better and to learn more and to help others learn more. And it's one of those key aspects of allyship. I loved what you said. Like, it's almost like you need to find your own place in allyship. You need to find what it is that you are good at, that you do have influence over. And that tells you how you can be a good ally. As you say, not everybody's going to be at the protest, but not everybody can actually influence policy and change policy within your organization. And if you have that power, then use that to be the ally that people need of you. So I really love the way that you described that. How does privilege play into this conversation?
That's a dangerous can of worms to open, I think, but it's critical. One of the things that I have become more and more comfortable with is understanding what my privilege is, and reframing it as a superpower in the sense that knowing the spaces that I hold privilege allows me to be more effective in creating better inclusion in those spaces for people who don't have the same level of privilege. And we know from, a lot of the work that's been done in inclusion over history that an underrepresented group is rarely listened to by the people in positions of power and influence. And the real progress is actually made when people in those positions of power and privilege get on board and start helping. Because, if you're talking about a space in women's rights, a man who doesn't believe that women have the same rights or are seen as equal isn't really going to sit and listen to a woman. But if a man comes in and starts the conversation, that's when the barriers get broken down. And so I think privilege is critical in moving things forward. Understanding your privilege is critical. It is weaponized. I recognize that. And, if I go back to what I said earlier around social media and people being able to be shut down, and terms like straight white man are thrown around and weaponized a lot. And I think those are those moments. If someone calls you out for that, instead of trying to justify your position and that you are an ally, take that on board, understand, right, what is it about my privilege that I can use to help progress this, rather than sitting there arguing with someone else who may want the same outcomes as you or may want to drive the same sort of change. Recognize that their perspective comes potentially from not having the same levels of privilege you are. And how can you harness that? How can you harness that superpower that you might have and use that as your allyship tool, you know, and the way in which you can make change.
I like that. And then, you know, thinking back to that, finding your place, also knowing your place too in that. So when can my privilege pave the way for somebody else's voice to be heard?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have access to.
I always say with privilege, you have to understand when to speak up, when to shut up, and when to move aside. And so, you know, like it's really, and it's a fine line sometimes, you know, and sometimes you've got to speak up and shut up in the same kind of thing. You know, you've got to be loud enough to call attention to it, but then amplify somebody else's voice at the same time. So it is it can be a fine line, and it can be a bit tricky, and it's not an absolute, you couldn't tick boxes and do things, but yeah, it is understanding those moments where your privilege should be an opportunity for you to speak up on behalf of your group, to say, hey, we've got to do better, when you need to amplify the voices so that of people with lived experience, so that they have a platform, because often they don't share the same platforms you do. And sometimes you've just got to step aside and let the people who are the change makers do the work and do the talking and create the change that they need to change.
Brilliant. Love this conversation. We are just about at time. So I want to say a huge thanks for not just coming on today, but all the incredible work that you do outside of Bree Gorman Consulting and also inside of it. You know, I'm learning constantly from you, and I'm sure people have taken a lot out of this conversation. We might have had a little technical issue with questions coming through, so we will make sure we get to those questions and respond via text for any that did come through. I just want to say, just before we wrap up, training calendar is open for me for this year. If you're wanting inclusive leadership training in your organisation, LGBTIQA+ inclusion training, or our new offering this year is the inclusive recruitment, kind of more of a masterclass, I suppose. It's a bit more of a focus to our workshop for hiring managers, talent acquisition staff, to really unpick the way that biases and discrimination do show up in the recruitment process. So if any of those are on your training calendar or should be on your training calendar for this year, please reach out and we can book those in. Thank you for listening. As always, if you want to come on the show, or if you've got a topic that you'd love us to talk about and we can source somebody to come and talk on it, please reach out and let us know. Really keen to continue these this year, and we usually try to hold them about once a month. So if you're keen to jump on, we'd love to see you. And thanks again, Teresa, for an awesome conversation on allyship.
Thanks for having me, Bree.
All right. See you next time.